Writers are often told to write the book they want to read. Today, we're talking to a baker who did just that. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Kate Leahy, and I'm here today with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Kate.
Is there a book out there that you wish you had written or one that you really want to write?
I have always wanted a book that gave instruction on like improvising and baking to try, it's like, here's the formulas and then here's how you can make it your own. Just because that's often how I cook. I have trouble totally following a recipe. And so I'm like, all right, can I learn these rules in baking? And I actually think we're starting to see a little bit more of that, which is great.
It is great. It takes a heavy lift, I think, to write these books that give you these foundations because baking, as we talked about before, you can't just like season to taste at the end. That's not how baking works.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. How about you, Kate?
I think for me, it's more like right now I'm working on this mystery and I want to see that out in the world because I think if I saw this novel on a shelf at a bookstore, I would want to read it. So that's kind of like what it makes it exciting. It kind of makes you want to go to your desk every day and work on it when you have a project like that. But it doesn't necessarily make it easier. It actually sometimes makes it harder because you have high expectations for yourself.
Yeah, totally. But writing the book you want to read, it's actually reminding me a little bit of when we spoke with Danny Childs in episode 74. And, he read a lot of foraging books. He read a lot of cocktail books. He read a lot of like cooking and science books, but like he wanted something that brought all of those things together and, it was like synthesized a lot of that. And that's eventually what he wrote. So it's pretty cool when authors are able to do that.
I love Danny's story, and I recommended that episode to people who are trying to figure out how to get a book published. I mean, he had to work so hard getting that proposal together. That actually leads us into today's interview. We're talking today with UK author Nicola Lamb. She has a book that came out in spring 2024 in the UK and then in fall 2024 with Clarkson Potter in North America. I think she's like pretty much like she's a teacher first and foremost, but she's also this amazing recipe developer and trained pastry chef based in London. I mean, she's worked at top bakeries, London, New York. She's worked with Ottolenghi, and she has this newsletter on Substack called Kitchen Projects. I can't wait to talk to her about Substack because that, I think, is really going to be part of, her story of how she became a writer. When we had Laura Hamilton on from Book Larder, she said this was one of the books she was looking forward to the most for fall 2024. It's a really great book that just makes you excited about baking and not being intimidated by the science aspect. A little spoiler, she's a fan of the show, so we can get really nerdy in this episode. Should we bring her on?
Let's do it.
Nicola, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
I am so excited to be here. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of this podcast. And when I was right at the beginning of writing my book, I would go on walks when I was feeling really stressed. And I would listen to you guys talking about all of the different processes, episode 1, 2, 3, and 4, where you really get into the nitty gritty. And it would really pump me up to going into the book writing process. So thank you. You guys really helped me on my book journey.
Awesome. We love to hear that. You also pitched us and your pitch was so well done. Just for any other authors listening, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to pitch us, if you can hone in on something really specific to your book writing process, that's usually what we love to talk about.
Well, I'd been listening to your podcast a lot and so much. I think it was after I listened to an edition. I was doing my gardening. I was tending to the tomatoes. And I was listening to your episode where you were speaking to a cookbook agent. It's a brilliant episode. And so much of it was about just like asking the question, go for it, just send the email. And I pretty much just came indoors after that, got out of my gardening clothes and sent you guys an email. And you replied. I was very starstruck. I still am. So I'm going to try and be normal in this whole chat. I'm going to try.
Oh gosh, I think this is going to be so fun. Well, let's go into your publishing journey because I think it is really different than a lot of the guests you've probably heard on the podcast. You have this great Substack newsletter. And I think you write in your newsletter that you wrote the book you wish you had when you first started baking. And I'm imagining you're somebody who started out baking, you have all these questions, you're looking for sources. But I mean, do you still remember today what it felt like to be that new baker?
100%. So I always liked baking growing up, but it was something that I got really into when I moved to London at 18 and I didn't have many friends and not that much money. Ingredients, they can be expensive, but in general, I could spend an afternoon baking and it'd be something that was a really meaningful thing to do with my time before I just had, a whole social life in London. And I used to take those cakes into the office. I was working in an office job. And I realized that I could do something at home and I would bring joy and it would spread this happiness in the office. And I thought, wow, baking is such a worthwhile thing to do. And so I carried on kind of learning a bit on my own for the first few years before I decided to go into kitchens professionally. But it was at that stage where I was so desperate to just absorb all the information that I could. And I found that there were two types of resources and books that at least I could find at the time. You had these brilliant books like Advanced Bread and Pastry, the Michael Suaz baking book, which is huge. It's a doorstop. It's an incredible resource. But all of the recipes are for 20 kilos of croissants and these huge batches, and they're definitely aimed towards professionals or people taking professional courses. And on the other hand, you could get these beautiful baking books, which are sort of 100 beautiful baking recipes, which are full of inspiration, but didn't always give me the technique or didn't always explain the why. And so when I decided to write this book, or when I had the opportunity to write the book, I decided that I wanted to write something that married those two things together, something that could be an incredible resource and something that also had those inspirational recipes, and sort of put them together in a way that was useful for both at-home bakers and professionals. I did the thing where I tried to do it all, which I know is a trap that you can get into when you try and write a book, but I thought that maybe I could just give it a go.
And when did you think you were ready to start writing a book?
Well, I started writing my Substack during lockdown, and because all of the kitchens, professional kitchens, were closed during lockdown, or at least had gone down into skeleton staffs, I was able to answer questions that I had had for a long time. As you know, when you're working in production kitchens and service kitchens, you don't always have a lot of time for R&D. It's one thing that chefs will always say, there's just no time to test if that pastry would have been slightly better with 5% more egg yolk or 10% more egg yolk. You just kind of have to go with what you've got. And so finally we had so much time during lockdown, and I was able to finally answer some of those questions and also experiment. I could finally say, hey, I'm going to learn how to make cannoli just because I actually have time to do that. Whereas if I'd said that in the middle of a busy production schedule, I think my head chef would have been like, okay, yeah, would you mind just finishing, the 20 liters of ice cream that we need to before you start faffing around with cannolis? So I was able to do all of that from the comfort of my home. And then I started writing about it. And what I've found is that a lot of chefs have said to me, thank you so much for doing some of this research, because it means that we kind of can take a bit of a shortcut into knowing, okay, I actually quite like the look of that mousse that uses extra egg yolks and extra cream compared to the one that uses just egg whites and cream. So thank you very much. And they can use it as a jumping off point. So after about maybe 6 months of writing my Substack, that's when my agent got in touch with me. I didn't send her a proposal for well over a year. I think it took me about a year and a half to write my proposal. I was terrible. I dodged her text every week.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
I was it was bad behavior, actually.
So she's like, Nicola, I haven't heard from you in a while. How is the progress going with the proposal?
She was the most patient person. Her name is Emily Sweet, which is not the perfect name for someone, a cookbook agent with baking clients. She was very, very patient with me. She knew that I was still working and still writing. I'm sure both of you have experienced this, and everyone listening, you have this thing of what is it to be a writer? I don't want to get too pretentious about it, but there is this thing about having an identity as a writer, and the way that writers are described in media and the way that they're depicted in media. You sort of have this thing where you're like, well, I'm not that. I'm not this kind of person who's sitting at the beautiful oak desk and really agitated over a sentence. And I'm not an author. It felt very, very alien to me. It wasn't necessarily imposter syndrome. It was just more like, I feel very much like a cook and a chef more than a writer. And so I was able to kind of muddle through those feelings and also just get loads of practice in by writing my Substack every week. After about a year of really just like making a lot of effort on my Substack and publishing every single week, I never missed it. Ever since I've been publishing, I've always published at the same time every week, 8:30 on a Sunday morning. I'm always there. Like, I don't even schedule send it. I always watch it go out. I'm really obsessed with it. And I think it was just practice. And actually, one of the things that I really believe in with baking, repetition is so important. And it's the same for writing. It's the same for any skill. You just have to show up and do it loads. And it can be really painful and boring, but that's the only way to get better.
That's really true, the practice part. And I feel like a lot of times we overlook how important practice is. But I'm wondering, so that proposal that you worked on with your agent, Emily Sweet, I do love that name.
I do too.
So good.
Was it pretty close to the end product? Because I feel like a proposal is that first time you're going to sort of conceptualize an entire book. And this is not a straightforward baking book. This has a lot of complexity in it as a structure. What was the proposal like?
I do wonder, maybe it took me so long to write the proposal because it was almost like fully formed as to what the book is now. I was very inspired by more modern reference books like Samin Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Like, I love the way that she had put all that information up front and then followed up with recipes. So that book was a real North Star to me, thinking, okay, what would be the baking version of that? I mean, baking is less intuitive than cooking. So it was never going to be exactly that, and it can't be. And that book is brilliant and unique in its own thing. But I was very inspired by that layout. And I thought, okay, if I am going to try and attempt to write this book, and the book that I wish that I'd had, the book that has all of this technical information, but recipes too, there can only be so many ways to lay it out before it gets really muddled. I know that there are some brilliant baking books that they have the recipes and they have the tips per each recipe as you go through. And I love those, and I own those books. But for me, it was really important to write a proposal that put all of that information in a way that it could be read page to page, almost like a textbook, because that was something that I hadn't seen in a baking book, plus with those recipes. So to answer your question, the proposal was pretty much fully formed as it was. I'm going to do the 8 sections up front, the sugar, fat, flour, eggs, color, texture, technical overview, and color, I think it is. I haven't said those 8 in a row for a while because I realized that those were the techniques. What I did was I went through my Substack. I was looking at all the different things that I'd written about the Maillard reaction, everything I'd written about caramelization. And I started kind of forming these topics and thinking, okay, if I wanted to pretty much use this paragraph, what section would that go under? And that was how I came up with those subtitles.
Oh, cool. I think I saw in your newsletter when you announced your book deal, like a wall of Post-its or something. It seems
yeah, tell us about those.
Yes, I have it downstairs. My husband is so sweet. He framed it, which was it was very romantic.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice.
He was very supportive during the process and had those Post-its all around the house. So what I did was once I'd figured out those 8 titles, I then started thinking about all of the things that I'd learned in baking and what section they would go under. And everything that's in the book is either something that I've researched myself or I've read in books. I have a really long bibliography on my website. But so much of the information in the book is lessons that have been taught to me whilst I've been working in professional kitchens. It's impossible to replicate. And I've tried really hard, but it is impossible to replicate that feeling of standing next to a teacher that you respect and a teacher that has really worked on their craft, and they're showing you exactly how that brioche should look and how it should smell, or exactly when something is ready. And all of those lessons, things about how to use your different senses, how to use smell, how to use your hearing, all of these different things I tried to put into that book. So I really just had a bit of like a soul-searching few hours where I thought, what is everything that's interesting that I've learned about baking? And then I started putting Post-its in place. And then I thought, okay, that's my structure.
That's cool. You're such a teacher. When we were reading the book, like you said, incorporating those sensory details and lots of analogy too. Some of those analogies, are they things you picked up from other people, or are they things you developed on your own being in your kitchen?
A lot of them are things that I developed whilst writing my newsletter. So every single week on my newsletter, which is huge kind of undertaking every week because I get so obsessed and I absolutely love doing it. It's such a pleasure to write it. I always try and think, okay, have I answered every single question about this cake that I can? Like, is there any more tests that I can do? And then I sit down to write it. And then I just start trying to work out how I can make this make sense. Because for me, maybe it seems obvious or maybe that I've done it a lot of times, but I have to remember that someone might be Googling for the first time how to make puff pastry because they've just decided to do it. And I think, okay, what would that person need to know? Because also it's silly to think that someone, even if they have been baking for a long time, might not need to be reminded of those basics. And I have to remind myself of them every time that I'm cooking. They've become more second nature. But it's definitely always trying to pitch it to an audience where it's like, well, if you don't know anything, this is still for you. If you do know everything, this is a good reminder. It can be hard, but that's what I try and do.
That's true. And Kristin, to your point about analogies, like one of them is auto lease, like, you know, the phrase work smarter, not harder. I mean, that's a great kind of way to like remember what auto lease is, which for a lot of people, it might be the first time they're hearing that word.
True.
For other people, they might know the word, or maybe they kind of thought they knew the word or they forgot, or they just were like, oh, this is a way I can explain it to somebody else.
Totally. Coming up with some of those subtitles is hilarious.
Yeah.
I know we'll get to the design part, but the designer, I would go round to his house on a Saturday and we'd be sitting in front of his computer and I'd be going, okay, I need to choose this subtitle now. I need to choose it now because my editor gave me so much space to do it. And I was like, okay, what fits in that space? Have I already said that word? Have I already said the word stretch too many times on this page? Okay, let's think of a different word. I'm really happy with how they all came out in the end. Some of them were a bit silly, but I don't mind.
No, that's a really good point. Let's just jump to the publishing process a little bit and go back into the book. But I wanted to just go into your publishing journey. I know that you listen to the podcast and I know you've heard a lot of other authors on. I want to know what is different about yours because you got your first book deal in the UK, right?
So the US and the UK has a few different quirks and systems. I don't know exactly what the differences would be in terms of actually like signing on the deal. But one of the main things that's different in the UK is that photography is paid for by the publisher, and that's all done in-house. It still blows my mind that the US and Canadian authors have to organize all of that out of their advance, only because my experience was so different. It's all handled in-house, and then the publisher puts on all of that. They help you pick the photographer, they help pick everything, and they also produce the photo shoot with you. So that is a huge difference once you actually sign the deal. In terms of my own journey actually getting the deal, so I had my agent contact me about 6 months into writing the newsletter. She was very helpful, but I finally gave her my proposal about a year and a half later, and then she sends it out to all the publishers. And then the way that she did it, which I absolutely loved, was it was like speed dating. So what she did was she said, okay, my client, Nicola, here's her proposal. She's going to be available next Tuesday. And if you want to meet her, if you're interested in this book, we're going to set up meetings. And so we had this full day of meetings, and it was so funny. And it really was like speed dating because you're trying to work out which editors you like, and maybe they're sort of flirting with you a bit about, you know, what they're going to do or where their books can go. You know, you'd meet one and my agent would say, oh, they're really good at getting your book into supermarkets. Oh, this publisher is really good at translation rights or whatever it is. So she would kind of give me a bit of a heads up about what each one was particularly good at. But mainly she just wanted me to meet the editor and to meet them and for them to meet me. And so then we could really see whether they had the same vision on the book. Because let's be honest, Sift, as it is it's not the most, it's a complicated book. It was a complicated book to produce. You know, even my proposal was full of sentences that said fun diagrams. Like I can't tell you how many times I would put the word fun before things to try and make them sound more interesting. There'd be lots of fun charts, lots of fun graphs. And so I really had to try and sell it because I really knew that I needed someone to believe in the vision of the book, because it wouldn't necessarily be an easy sell to their sales team. Like I totally understand like the way that it works. The editor might like it, but then the sales team would say, who's going to buy a 400-page book about autolyse? Or who's going to buy a book that has a full page diagram on like the different pHs of sugar? Like I understand it could have been a hard sell. So it was important for me to go and meet them. We had those meetings, and then I already had a publisher which I wanted to work with, who fortunately were interested in my book. then it was quite exciting. I had a pop-up that weekend and I was prepping for this pop-up at my friend's bakery. I remember my agent calling me going, I think we have an offer on the table. Can you step out? And I would, I would step outside in the middle of mixing my dough and I would talk to her and she's like, okay, we're going to go for this number and blah, blah, blah. It was kind of perfect because I was just in the place where I needed to be. I needed to be in the kitchen where I felt most comfortable, developing recipes, producing. It was a summer fruit pop-up. So I was, in the walk-in sorting out all of this fruit at the same time as my agent texting me going, okay, they're going to go back into the meeting. And we were going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until she just texted me saying, okay, the deal is done. And I remember just like standing there and going, wow, I can't believe this is actually happening. This is so bizarre. But I couldn't even take any time to celebrate it because I really had to produce more. I had to finish producing cakes and tarts for this pop-up. So I remember just getting my phone out and going, okay, putting it back in my pocket and then just having this secret.
Back to real life.
Right.
Back to real life. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. But I loved it. It was perfect. And I was so happy. I'm still so happy.
I could see publishers looking at your proposal and saying, oh, but like, what if we have recipes in each, like throughout? Like I could see people thinking, oh, because then the recipes, like if they all live in the second part of the book, are people not going to page through that fast? Or I could see other people having different opinions. It's really important then to go with the publisher that really respected what you had set out with all those Post-it notes and like really had thought about.
Totally. And actually the proposal is very accurate to how it is now. Nothing has changed really at all. In fact, nothing. And I was really, really strict with what I wanted it to be because again, it's quite a specialist book. And I think baking can be a very specialist topic. So I really was trying to say, this is what this book's going to be. And yeah, I was quite firm about it, I'd say.
Like the title too?
Oh, no, the title was actually originally, which is not a good name, but it was How to Build a Bake. That is actually a name of a section in the back. That was just kind of the working title, which I knew was probably not how it was going to end up, but that sort of summed up what I was trying to describe.
Cool. And where did Sift come from?
Sift came from, I have this Google Doc, oh my goodness, me, my agent and my editor. I would say it's probably like 600 words long, where I just said, I'm just going to write every baking word I can think of in a document. And then we're just going to look through them and just see if anything sticks. That's actually what I did. I was just like looked around my kitchen and I was just going, okay, whisk, spatula, okay, that's not going to work. And I just kept doing it until eventually Sift came out and we thought, that's got a double meaning. It's short, it's visual.
Yeah, very visual.
Yeah. We were lucky. I feel like naming a book is really, really difficult. And we're beginning to run out of short words that people can use to have as the title. So I feel very lucky.
That's so cool. At what point did you sell the book to the US?
It happened quite early. And I don't know about how this works in the US, but obviously you get paid your advance. And the way that you, I guess, pay back your advance is through book sales. But one of the other really good ways to pay back your advance is by selling translation rights. Now, some really, really big authors who have different, international agents, they might sell the US rights and the UK rights separately. But what I did, or my agent negotiated, and I think is quite standard, at least for a lot of authors, is that you sell the worldwide rights to your publisher. So mine is Ebury in the UK, and then their translation team goes around and makes a little pamphlet, I guess, of Sift. They share it around and they say, okay, this is the book, these are the rights, and then they negotiate that for you. And then what happens is, depending on the territory, between, I think my contract says 60 to 80% of that amount gets paid off against your advance. So it's a really nice way, if it happens, to pay down your advance chunk by chunk. So rather than paying down your advance, $1 or $2 at a time, you're able to get these lump sums, which is an amazing way for an author, especially if you've got something with global appeal, to be able to actually start trying to make money from their book, because paying off in advance, as we know, people don't realize that most earning out your advance is actually not something that happens that regularly.
Right. How did you land at Clarkson Potter as your North America publisher?
I got my book deal. Let's do a little timeline. So I got my book deal in July. They told me that they wanted me to have 10 finished recipes submitted by September. And then we were going to do a photo shoot in the following January, so then they could produce this mini Sift for translation rights. So we appointed our designer. I had to give them 2 sections, one of the sections from the front, and so then that could be fully designed, and then some recipes as well. And so what they did is they basically, made a mini PDF of what the book would look like, and that kind of was a bit of a taster that then could be sent around to publishers. There are a few really big book fairs in the UK. So there's one in May and there's one in September, I think. And that's when all of the translation teams get together and they sort of show different publishers what they've got coming up, and a lot of deals get done in that time. I believe the US deal happened just before that. I think there is quite a strong relationship between Ebury and Clarkson Potter. Ottolenghi is published by Ebury. I believe that Clarkson Potter also, or 10 Speed, which I think there are those.
Right.
I still don't fully understand these kind of like sibling publishing
I don't
house
really
things.
either. Right.
So there we go. That'll be a good episode of Everything Cookbook.
We will have to look into that. Yeah.
Please, because I always hear about, Penguin Random House has bought another publisher, but they're all still unique and apparently not connected and completely editorially uninvolved.
Right.
So I was so excited. I got an email that said 10 Speed / Clarkson Potter would be interested. And then I had this wonderful experience where 2 editors, one from 10 Speed and one from Clarkson Potter, wrote me lovely letters. And I was able to choose who I wanted to publish with through that.
Oh, neat.
It was so nice. I really loved it. I felt like a little special princess, like, oh, this is my book. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And I have to say, so that was really cool. And again, I just tried to go with the editor who I felt had just the same excitement that I did.
That makes sense. Can you tell us about the cover? One thing I know you've heard us talk about, and Kristin, we've talked about on the podcast about illustrated covers versus having food on the cover. And we always complain, North America books, they always have to have food on the cover. Well, the UK gets all these cool covers. So tell us just about your cover. And they are different, but spoiler, they're illustrated.
They are different. So I found the whole cover process very, very difficult in general. We went through a few, and actually the one that we went with in the end, the beautiful, bold graphic Sift with the flower particles around it that my designer actually drew dot by dot. I mean, they really did an amazing job.
Oh,
I know.
Gosh.
The file is so big, it breaks his computer every time he opens it. It's so funny. I, for some reason, just couldn't visualize it myself. And now I love it. And I think this is why also it's so important to work with a team that you trust, because I think maybe at that point in the book writing process, I had just had complete decision paralysis. I'd made so many choices about the layouts inside of the book. I was so involved with the design. I just think by the time I got to the cover, I was like, I can't, my eyes aren't working.
Yeah.
Completely fatigued. And I was like, I don't know if this is good anymore. Like, you need to help me. We got this beautiful buttery yellow. We did see a few different colors, but the yellow in the UK was something that we really felt wasn't in the baking aisle. I mean, my designers were amazing. They really went to loads of bookshops and they went and had a look in the baking section and what colors were popular. And they really wanted to design something for me that stood out. And so when it got translated to the US, I was quite sure they were going to put a photograph on the cover because it's a baking book and the photographs are stunning. Sam Harris was my photographer and Holly Cochran, my food stylist. What they did was absolutely beautiful. And so I was thinking, okay, it'll definitely be food on the cover. And it just turned out that the Clarkson Potter US team really, really liked that bold graphic color, but they decided that they wanted to run it in a different color. And they sent me a few different pinks. And what is amazing about this pink is that just like the yellow, it looks different in so many different lights. It's actually quite fluorescent. And so depending on where you're looking at it and where it is in the shop, it really stands out. And there's something funny about this book cover. Whenever I hold it in a photo, it always looks like it's been photoshopped in for some reason. It looks like a fake book. I always have photos of me holding it and it just looks, there's something so bright about the colors. And so the US team, they decided they wanted to keep this bold graphic cover. And they said, okay, these are the colors that we are thinking of. They printed them out and then they sent them to me. So I was able to see them physically. Because as you know, things look so different printed out.
Yeah, that's wild. Like, did they tell you why they want it pink?
I don't know. I think they wanted it to have a point of difference from the UK one, maybe.
Oh,
And I think maybe pink is a more of a baking color. I don't know. I even though actually I think yellow looks like butter,
Mm-hmm.
maybe just from their market research. And again, this is why it's so important to work with a publisher that you like, because I just had to trust that they knew their market and they know that, someone maybe is more likely to pick up a bright pink book in the baking section. I did actually go back and forth with them. I did say, do we worry that pink is too divisive? I know they were moving away from gender norms, but still a bright pink book can sometimes shout kind of Barbie, female,
right.
that kind of thing. But they didn't seem, they were like, no, we don't feel that way. And I said, okay, cool, I trust you. And I do love it now. I was nervous at first because I was so used to the yellow one, but I really do like the pink color, really does stand out.
I'm still like, wow, they sent color swatches. It's
Right.
like
Well,
such, I've never,
No.
that's like the first time I've
Did your
heard that.
agent have anything to do with that, or?
Um, I have to say, I can only compare my own book experience with myself because I've only done it once. And obviously, I listen to you guys a lot. Obviously, those ins and outs of email exchanges, they don't often get aired months later. Because I loved the yellow so much, and because I know that my designers had also been so specific with getting their Pantone books out. And so we asked for the Pantone references. And even though my UK designer was not designing my US book, he's a really good friend. So I was like, please, can you check these colors? And he was sending back options to them as well via me. And so I just think that I said that I really cared about it. And I think that they maybe just didn't expect their authors to care that much about the exact shade of the pink that it was. So I think I just asked. I realized actually during this process, and for both UK and US, sometimes you just ask. They might say no, and they might say no, we're really confident, but it might be that they go, yeah, our art department can print out these three, and they'll just send it, because often these publishers, they're huge and they can afford to send you a piece of mail, hopefully, and hopefully they will. And I think also just showing that you care is a really good way to get people to invest more in the product too.
Totally.
I think you're right. That's a really good lesson. Just it doesn't hurt to ask. And it is important, I think, because a PDF of a cover just looks so different than it does in real life. I'm curious. Sometime we'll have to have someone on from the inside of Penguin Random House and ask them. I'm really curious.
Totally.
Well, let's get inside the book a little bit more. We talked about the cover. We talked about bits and pieces of like the structure of the book. You said you divided it into two parts. And one of the things I think you say in your introduction is it's the reference book of my dreams with, and you say, all the fun diagrams. And we talked about, like Kristin mentioned, your voice as a teacher. Tell us more about the actual writing.
So the first thing I did once I'd organized and this is also why if someone is thinking about writing a book, starting to get a regular writing schedule by publishing on Substack or something similar, I think from my perspective is really valuable. Because when I went to write the book, okay, I had sugar. I made a Google Doc for sugar. I had a Google Doc for eggs, a Google Doc for flour, Google Doc for whatever it was. And then I read through every single newsletter I'd published. I think it was about 90 by that time. And anything that I'd ever said about eggs, I copied and pasted and put into the eggs. Anything I'd ever said about texture, I put it in. And obviously, it became this Wild West and completely unreadable, crazy document. And then from that, I said, okay, I really like the way that I described a meringue here. I think that's really useful. I think that's actually slightly better than I've ever described it, even though I did this in newsletter 2 and I've never gone back to that. So I was like, okay. And then I would pick out all my favorite things from it. And then I would put them and I would kind of put everything else at the bottom of the document. And then I started almost like a sculptor. That's how it sort of felt. I felt like I got this clay, which was everything I'd ever said about butter. And I just started chipping away, trying to create a form, because obviously I had a word count that I needed to stick to. And I just started chipping away at it and thinking, okay, how is this book going to look? I'm going to have the main text, and then I'm going to have these little breakout sections. So maybe little facts or maybe things that don't quite fit. And I started visualizing along with my designers how that was going to look. And we came up with this 2/3, 1/3 kind of layout. And that meant that I was able to break things off and move little bits of information that didn't quite work in the flow, but was still related to that section off to one side. So actually, design and form was really important, and having that idea very early, because it really informed the way that I structured chapters.
It's such a nice way to like also not start with a blank document, like go
Totally.
back to what you already did and then sort of synthesize it in a different way. And then with the recipe development, how did you manage that on top of doing your Substack?
I think one thing that I try and teach in the book is that if you know how to bake this, then you know how to bake this. Or if you want to add coffee to your choux, you can turn a choux bun into a coffee flavored choux bun with a different filling that's borrowed from a cake very, very easily. And so actually what I was able to do is I was able to mix and match an olive oil lemon curd that I really loved and match that with a tart case or another pastry recipe that I'd really loved. And so some of it was developing recipes 100% from scratch, but a lot of it was actually trying to practice what I preached in the book, which was once you know how to make this cake base, you can put that with this filling and you've got something completely different. And I'm always trying to explain how everything is sort of related in baking. And once you know how to make one thing, you can actually make 10 things. I would try to always do that. And I think there can be this temptation of I need to start something completely from zero. For example, I had a cookie recipe that I developed on my newsletter for one of those chunky, Levain style. I was like, okay, I'm going to put every baking book needs to have at least one really chocolatey, crazy looking cookie because that's often what people want to bake.
Yeah.
I get it.
Because we're here for them. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, not everyone wants to learn how to make laminated brioche, Nicola. Just give them a cookie. Give them 100%. A cookie. And so I was able to look at the base recipe that I'd done before for a very plain chocolate chip cookie in that style. And I thought, okay, I really loved these miso walnuts that I'd actually had in a muffin. What about if I just combine these two? And it actually was kind of like a natural marriage. So again, I'm such a big fan of Substack. It really helped me develop a huge range of recipes. When I was doing my Substack, I was just doing, let's say, 1 to 2 recipes per week. But it really meant that over time, you've suddenly got this huge kind of font of developed recipes that you know inside out. That you can take from. So what I would do is I would keep writing my newsletter every week, but at the same time, I would try and test about 1 to 2 recipes on top for the book. Then I'd also be sending them out to be tested as I went to make sure that we were kind of keeping up on making sure that it didn't get to submission date. And I said, oh, all my recipes are still being out with my recipe testers, which, by the way, it might be a different topic. I self-funded recipe testing. I decided that it was a worthwhile thing. I do know that there are some authors who negotiate recipe testing budgets as part of their advances or on top of it. Especially in the UK, I know that some people have publishers that pay their recipe testers directly, but that's a very specific thing that you have to negotiate into your contract early. So if I ever get lucky enough to write another book, I will be asking them to
fund the recipe testing.
Right. Yeah, just give me a little bit towards that because I did make sure that everything was tested. And I was very passionate about that to make sure that was all good. And then I decided to take about a month off my newsletter or maybe 2 months. And I would kind of just publish a little bit here and there. And that's when I did the main body of anything that needed to be tested from scratch. So I have a whole section about viennoiserie and croissants. And even though I have the base recipe sorted, I needed to develop 8 or 10 things that needed to go on that. And croissants, they just take so much time. You have to be so focused. It's really hard to multitask whilst developing a croissant recipe because you do this thing where you cut the dough and you go, okay, that was 5 centimeters by 7 centimeters. Okay, I'm going to remember that. Nope. An hour later, you don't. And so we've all been there. So I was like, I really need to focus during this part.
Did you have to look up any science or consult sort of scientific manuals? Because one thing you talk about in the introduction, you say, I'm no scientist, but I've learned how to play by the rules set by the ingredient, which ones play nicely together and which ones should be kept apart. I wonder if you love doing deep dives into Harold McGee or whatever kind of texts that...
I was about to say, oh boy, Harold, love him. That book really changed my baking life. I think when I first went into professional kitchens, was one of the first books that I bought because I would hear my chefs. And even though I taught myself to not be embarrassed if I didn't know what something meant, I really wanted to try and keep up with some of the conversations I was hearing. I really wanted to know what enzymatic browning meant. Like if someone was talking about that, I was like, okay, at least try and contextualize that in your own mind. So I got on food and cooking and I read it cover to cover, absolutely loved it. Really thought it was brilliant. It's still one of my most loved books. Another great reference book is a book called How Baking Works by Paula Fagoni. It is a textbook. I'm pretty sure that it was written to be a textbook To be honest, there are so many brilliant baking schools. You've got the CIA, you've got the SF one where Michael Suaz worked and ran. I think people don't realize is you can actually buy the textbooks of these schools and study them. You aren't getting the one-on-one kind of tutoring, but you can actually access those resources. I did actually go to pastry school for a month, and then I realized that I was learning more working in kitchens. So I did quit, but I kept my textbook for that, and that was quite useful. Yeah,
I bet.
exactly.
I bet.
I remember one of my most heartbreaking moments was when my publisher told me that I couldn't have an extra 5 pages to have my bibliography. So it all lives on my website, and I have a. I know I was so upset. I was like, but I've written it and it's all organized, but it says in my acknowledgements, bibliography, my website, further reading, and it's got everything there. So I really hope that people do actually go to that and read those resources because they've been so instrumental in my understanding.
Yeah.
We need to talk about the design of this book. We've danced around it a little bit. We've talked about your designer. You have these, as you say, fun charts. You worked really closely with the designer, but how did that process work?
So I was very fortunate in that I really pushed my UK publisher to work with the designers that we picked. So Josh and Chris, who are just absolutely brilliant. They had never done a cookbook before, but they love cooking. I knew them socially. I think I knew them through Instagram. And I remember I commissioned them to do something for me. Maybe it was a pop-up poster. And I went to their design office and I just hung out with them for the afternoon. I mean, they would bring their pressure cooker in and making like short ribs for lunch. Like they really loved cooking in this tiny office. And they would have these beautiful lunches. And I was like, these guys really care about food. I remember sitting in their office there with them, and they were saying to me, if you ever did a cookbook, we'd love to do it. And I was like, well, I am thinking about writing one. And this was during my ignoring agent phase. I was like, well, I might be writing one. I'll let you know. And I always had it in my mind that, you know, we were even talking about how recipe pages could be laid out. And I just thought, wow, these guys really get it because they use cookbooks all the time. Once I got the deal, I remember talking to my editor, and she was saying, oh, we have an idea of who we actually would like to do this book. And I said, okay, well, I also have an idea. And it was really nerve-wracking because I'm a first-time author. I didn't really know how much say I could have over that stuff. But again, I just thought I may as well ask, and maybe it will work out, maybe it won't. So what they actually ended up doing was they sent my source material out to 2 designers, my friends, and then the company that they normally work with. And they had both designers actually design a small section of the book to be like, how would you lay out these recipes? Which I know is quite rare to do. But I think because I was pushing so hard for Josh and Chris to be the designers both sent back what they would do with the text. And actually, the other design team were brilliant, but Josh and Chris just clearly had probably because they hadn't designed cookbooks before, they had such a new and novel point of view and such a novel and new way that they wanted to do the book. And so my publishers loved them, and we took a real chance with them. They'd never done a cookbook before, but it meant that I could also be very involved with them because I knew that with the amount of text that I was sending, having a good relationship with the designer was so, so crucial. Because if you're sending them, 10,000 words, all technical writing, I knew that I needed to be able to explain which bits needed to pop out. A lot of it really was me being at my designer's house, sitting next to him, going, should we do a diagram? I feel like this is a bit confusing. Let's do a diagram here, and then working it out as we went. So yeah, some of the charts were already existed and they were just these really ugly Excel charts, but some of them kind of were developed as we were designing it.
That's
really
so cool.
It's a lot more like how you work in magazines rather than books, because I do feel like a lot of times with books, you just like hand off so much material and then you get it back and you're like, I guess it works. So yeah, being able to sit with a designer and go chart by chart
right.
I know. I was so lucky.
And just talking about the word choices, like you were saying, like, okay, can I say egg foam again, or do I need another word?
And also the visual of the word. Sift is very visual, as you have said. And when you're choosing those headlines, what they look like.
I know I was really lucky in that regard to be able to work with designers that I knew. And as you say, most of the time the manuscript gets sent off and then 3 months later you get something back and you're like, let's change this, this and this. Josh and Chris really put in so much energy and effort into this book. Yeah, love them.
Are there any design changes that are significant between the North America and the UK edition?
Obviously, fitting in cups and grounds.
I was wondering about just Americanizing in general for the recipes and then how that affected the design.
Totally. So there was definitely like a bit of a back and forth about what we could fit into that because the recipes are complex, they have quite a lot of ingredients. And so the moment that you put in a slash and a cup and a word and a teaspoon or TSP, it starts looking really, really messy. So we did have a few attempts at what should come first. Should it say cups first or grams first? Should it have this, this, and that? And we were able to come up with something which I feel actually does look quite good to read without having to, shrink the fonts or anything like that. That was one of the biggest changes. There were some words and some language things that actually had to be changed. Candy floss, cotton candy.
Mm-hmm.
It was these little things that you don't think about.
Right.
There's obviously a lot more Zs in this book than there are in the UK version. So all of that has been changed. Those were the main things. And I worked with this amazing Americanizer, Maria Zizka. She also did Ottolenghi Comfort. Like, she is brilliant. She's so cool. And we had such a good working relationship. We didn't actually meet until after all the Americanization had been done, but we sort of had this pen pal relationship back and forth on documents, which was actually quite romantic.
Yeah.
We'd write each other these like long letters, but then we wouldn't have each other's emails, so we couldn't communicate. The way that they Americanize books is they pick about 30 recipes that they think will be the most difficult or they know maybe don't work as well in the US. So I think they took like the British scone recipe, and then they also took something with gelatin and stuff where they knew that, or anything with heavy cream, because heavy cream and double cream is quite different. And so what they do is they pick about 30 of the most tricksy recipes, and then they come up with a conversion chart. So for example, okay, Maria's cup is going to be 125 grams or 130. And then she would then convert those 30 recipes and then test those. And then she would check that those had worked and she would compare them as she went. She was brilliant. And one thing that she did, which I actually thought was so interesting, is that because Sift is all about accuracy in baking, she said that normally when you're doing a grams to cups conversion, I think there is like up to 2 teaspoons of difference, or maybe 3 teaspoons of difference that they are willing to accept as just like error. And she was like, I've reduced it down. She reduced it down to be like 1 teaspoon maximum or something. So she was really, 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 really accurate. And it does mean that you've got more things like 1 cup plus 1¼ teaspoon, which is more words, but for me is worth it.
Right.
So yeah, I was very grateful that she agreed to do that, and also that Clarkson Potter said, okay, yeah, give us the extra words.
Got it.
Right.
But then making the design fit, was it a little trickier?
Yeah, there were definitely some like run-on lines, and then we had to move because some of the recipes have notes, so storage notes, so that would have been moved to another page. So there was definitely a few kind of wiggling around bits, which felt really hard at first because I was so like, no, don't move anything. But now it's sort of like I look at it and go, oh, that looks great. That looks amazing.
Oh, good. Good. As we're wrapping up our conversation today, I wanted to first of all ask if there's anything that you have coming up next, if you have another book in the works, and also secondly, advice you have for other people listening who might be in your shoes as you were in 2020 and just kind of getting started with your Substack.
It's so funny when people say to me, oh, are you going to write another book? And I go, I actually don't know anything else. Like I've actually
I was wondering about that. Everything is so downloaded here. I was wondering if like I would be happy with this book for a long time and not feel pressure. Oh, I got to make the next thing.
I guess you can just go more narrow.
Right.
I was just like, I really don't know anything else yet, but I'm going to keep trying to learn. So I don't know. I definitely, there's like a book that I want to write with some friends, just like a kind of silly baking book. So I'll see if that happens, but that would be just like more of a fun, purely creative project. I really want to keep focusing on growing my Substack and working on that, the writing on that side. In terms of advice, I think that the biggest and most important thing I've ever learned in life is that consistency is everything, and not shying away from just showing up and doing the thing, whether that's making that Instagram post every day, because if you want to grow your social media, or it's showing up to a kitchen, a bakery every day because you really want to learn how to touch sourdough without it sticking to your hands. It's all about consistency. So I think if any writer or someone is out there and that they want to just sort of start, it's just give yourself grace, but also make sure that you just keep doing it, because I often think that consistency is the difference between something that seems like a successful and something that seems less.
Right. There's no such thing as an overnight success. Is that what they say?
No, they say it takes like 10 years. And I think it's true. I think you really have to, you just have to keep showing up and just enjoy the process every day. And also one other thing, which is maybe not, I don't know if this is positive or negative. You can tell me whether this is or not. But one thing that I realized, certainly in the book writing process, is that sometimes the end goal or the crossing the finish line, you think it might feel a certain type of way, seeing your book in a bookshop or getting the book deal. I think people think, okay, if I get that, then I'll feel a certain type of way. And I often think that you don't feel the way that you will expect, not in a negative way. That's why I'm very focused on just making every single day be a positive day in terms of work and how I feel about something. Because if you spend months and months and months going, okay, well, if I reach this goal, then I'll finally feel happy about it. That's not always the case. So again, it's just this thing of making the everyday happy and working as hard as you can every single day, rather than waiting for the final payoff. Is that sad?
No, that's smart.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Right.
Somebody asked me recently, like, what's the best part about working on cookbooks? And was like, working on cookbooks? Like, doing the work? I don't know.
Right.
You know, like, why do you keep doing it? I was like, because I like the work. You know?
Yeah.
I love that. Exactly. There is this feeling people get really sad sometimes after the book comes out because you have all this anticipation, all this anxiety, and then it's just out. And I remember saying this to myself the week before mine came out. I was like, this is the last time that your book is just yours. Like once it's out in the shops, it's like it's been there forever. It's so weird. Even if a book has been out for an hour, like it's there. And it's like it's always been there. And so there's this really precious moment just before it comes out where you can just go like, the only people that have seen this, you know, the amazing team that have worked on it, my editors who I love, and this is our little secret. Just enjoy that.
That's cool. I love that.
I love that. Nicola, this has been such a delight.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, still starstruck.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. This show is available wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, tell a friend about us. Spread the word. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.